Hey guys, Dave Men's Laundromat Millionaire here in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's Today is Tuesday, October 20th, I believe, 2020, and I just wanted to make a little video today and share with you um, kind of experience I had on a coaching call the other day. I was talking to a client of mine that I'm going to do some consulting for, and the client, I always encourage people to dig, to push, and sometimes that means the clients will dig and push me, which is fine. I enjoy the challenge, and when you push each other, you learn from those experiences, me included. And so I always enjoy the banter, but I also enjoy the challenge of pushing back and forth. And one of the things that the client asked me the other day is they said, Dave, I'm just getting into the laundromat business. You've been in the business for 10 years. You have 4 stores, robust pickup and delivery business, a robust drop-off business at your stores. And so he asked me, he said, after 10 years of being in the business, what is the biggest misconception in the laundromat industry? And that kind of took me back a little bit because I'd never been asked that question. I've been asked a lot of other ones, but not that one. And I had to pause for a minute. And I'll be honest with you, the client I was speaking with, I gave him an answer that was off the cuff. But I thought about it more after the fact. And the answer that I gave him actually isn't, in my opinion, the biggest misconception in the laundromat industry. And so I thought I would do this video on what is in my opinion, the biggest misconception in the laundromat industry. And that is that we as laundromat owners, for some reason, especially early on when you get into the business, we seem to think that we can't afford to purchase new equipment. And there was a time where I was in that boat. You get into the industry, you learn about the equipment. A lot of times you have older equipment in your stores, and you look at your budget, you look at your revenue, your expenses, and you say, I can't afford new equipment, especially when you look into the cost of the equipment. And I know a lot of you all that are in the industry are shaking your head right now, because not only does the cost of the equipment go up exponentially every single year, the manufacturers are raising their prices, typically more than inflation. And so the equipment gets more and more expensive every single year. And so it makes that barrier a little bit more difficult in a lot of people's minds. But the truth of the matter is, one of the things that I learned from my mentors early on, probably in the first year or two that I was in the industry, is that if you've done your business model correctly, if you're running your business correctly, if you have a good or a great location, if you have done proper competitive analysis, and what I mean by all these things is if your business is otherwise healthy, you don't have to have the best location, although that's great. You don't necessarily have to have the best operations, although that's fantastic to have that, and the best people. But the reality is, unless your business is otherwise unhealthy, you're in a bad market, an over-penetrated market, something like that. So those are the disclaimers. The reality is that unless you're one of those exceptions in the industry, in 99.9% of cases, your new equipment purchase will pay for that self. And so the reality is that there are people in the industry, in fact, a lot of us, at different points of our career, who believe that they can't afford to purchase new equipment. If they believe if they did purchase new equipment, that would be what little profit margins they have would go right out the window. And the reality is that that's very seldom true. And here's a few of the reasons why. The number one reason why is cheap money, leverage, financing. And I'm not suggesting that anyone become over leveraged. If you're anti-debt, that's fine. But the reality is that borrowing money has never been cheaper than it is right now. As our government continues to print trillions and trillions of dollars, we're eventually going to see the results of that being inflation at some point in time. A lot of people argue we're already seeing inflation well above what the CPI index indicates. But the reality is that's a video for another day. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to leverage and financing equipment, one of the best ways to purchase equipment in today's climate, October 2020, is to purchase the equipment with 100% financing. And especially if you're already in the industry, even if you don't have a ton of experience, it's not very hard to get a manufacturer's loan with very reasonable terms. To get a 7, 8, 10-year term at 6-7% with 100% financing on an equipment package for brand new equipment is not difficult to do at all. And so the first thing is, you can use it. You can purchase that equipment using OPM, other people's money. And so that's a great opportunity versus having to save up cash and miss out on other opportunities that you could have deployed that capital for. Use other people's money, but certainly don't over leverage yourself. So keep that in mind. The second thing is the tax benefits to it. And I'm not an accountant. I don't give tax advice, but the reality is that there are many tax benefits that I'm not going to go into detail with when you purchase new equipment. The ADA tax credits that exist for that new equipment, if it is ADA compliant, the normal depreciation, in a lot of cases accelerated depreciation or deferred depreciation, can make this tax year or that tax year less taxable, make your income less taxable than it would have been. So whether you defer that to a high income year or accelerate it to a previous year, there's a lot of tax advantages to purchasing new equipment. The next thing in that process is to really consider is, whenever you're replacing equipment with new equipment, even if your old equipment were, say, only 10 years old. Most people don't replace commercial laundry equipment at 8 to 10 years. They typically wait till a little bit longer. And a lot of people wait till 20 or 25 or 30 years. But the reality is, the older your equipment is, the more of energy savings you're going to see with your new equipment installation and usage. And so when you install brand new equipment, our industry in the last 8 to 10 years has made incredible progress in energy efficiency. So water usage, electricity usage, and natural gas usage. Along that same time frame, a lot of those expenses, utilities, have gone down in cost. And so the cost to operate the equipment is, in most cases, not always, but in most cases, much cheaper than it was years ago. And a lot of that is directly attributable to the manufacturers really focusing on this equipment being able to be operated, at a much cheaper rate. The next step in that process is going to be a situation where we is increased vend prices. One of the things a lot of people make the mistake of doing is not consistently increasing their vend prices with existing equipment in the store. The cost of everything goes up every day, and so we should constantly be increasing our prices accordingly. But the reality is, there's never a better time to do a very aggressive price increase than when you go from 10, 15, 20, 25-year-old equipment in your store to brand new equipment. And you don't have to replace the entire store at one time. You can put a third, a fourth, half of the store, do it in 3 or 4 different projects, and you can leave the existing prices for the older equipment slightly cheaper for people that are price sensitive, but the newer equipment you can charge a premium for. And so you can have a 40-pound washer that's 25 years old and a 40-pound washer that's brand new, and you can easily increase your vend prices on the new equipment by 25 to 50%. You may not believe me, but the reality is, I've been doing this a long time. I coach and consult with laundromat owners all over the country and have been for years. And the reality is, it's true. If you talk to anyone in the industry that operates at the top of the industry, the best time to increase vend prices very aggressively is when you install new equipment. And you will very seldom get pushback from that if you otherwise run a decent operation. And so when you take all of these things into account, really what you end up with is, you've leveraged the OPM, you've leveraged other people's money, by borrowing the equipment at reasonable terms. Let's say, for example, you purchase, and I'm just throwing out random numbers, but let's say you purchase $120,000 worth of equipment. And a lot of you may be going, like, $120,000 is a lot of money to borrow. That's a lot of equipment to put in a new laundromat in some situations. And I understand that. But let's say that you take a laundromat that maybe generates $2,000 a week, maybe less, in gross revenue, and you aggressively increase your vend prices, and then you also aggressively market your new equipment as being bigger and better and different than your competitors, and so all of a sudden you drive new revenue in. It's really not unreasonable to think that your gross sales can double by replacing 15, 20, 25-year-old equipment with brand new equipment. And so if you take a $100,000 loan and say you finance it over 8 years, I haven't done the math, but let's say that's $1,000 a month note payment for the equipment. But you've increased your sales by $8,000 a month. And this is gross numbers. So yes, your utility costs are going to go up proportionally, but your utility percentages as a percentage of gross sales should go down exponentially with the new equipment. And so by the time you factor all these things in, and then you factor in the depreciation, so whether your new income is taxable or not taxable, which, let's be honest, who wants to pay more taxes than they need to? And you take into account things like the ADA tax credit, that gives you a $5,000 tax credit, and this is not a write-off, this is actually a tax credit. So that's literally $5,000 that you take out of the government's pocket and put in your pocket just for purchasing the equipment. By the time you factor all these things in, the reality is I have purchased, in my 10 years in the industry, I have 4 stores right now, and I would estimate that I've purchased anywhere from $1.4 to probably $2 million worth of equipment in those 10 years. And that may cause a lot of people to just, it may take their breath away. I've borrowed almost all of that money. Very little of it have I not borrowed. And zero of it have I been in a situation where the equipment didn't pay for itself and exponentially bring me more revenue, both gross revenue and net profit. And so the reality is, when people ask me, hey, I own 1 or 2 small laundromats and they do okay, but I don't make enough money to be able to replace the equipment, and so I just keep trying to keep it running year after year. And they look at someone like me and they say, well, how does someone become a laundromat millionaire? I don't understand how that's possible, because I can't even generate enough revenue to be able to replace my equipment. Well, the reality is there's many different ways and that can be done, but a big part of it is understanding your industry, being obsessed with the details of this industry. But a lot of it also goes back to networking, which I constantly talk about, because it's great to learn from YouTube videos and things like this, but it's also great to learn from each other in person, whether that's at clean shows or online forums, or reading books that, if you've written a book that's going to help me in my journey, I'm going to pick that up. And the reality is, when you factor in all these things, chances are that every single person I'm talking to right now, if you own a laundromat and you have equipment that's over 10, 12 years old, minimum, the reality is there's almost a 95% chance that if you were to replace that equipment with brand new equipment, it would pay for itself, make your business more profitable and more healthy in the long term, allow you to increase vend prices, lower your taxable income. And if you do that year over year, project after project, whether it's a big $500,000 project of gutting 1 store all at once, or it's taking a 2,500 square foot laundromat and doing $80,000 in equipment here and $100,000 here and $50,000 there, over the course of 3 or 4 years. The reality is, how did I go from having liquid cash of $25,000 when I got into this industry to 10 years later being a multimillionaire? The reality is that that's how I did it. And so for all of you that are sitting out there saying it can't be done, the reality is it can be done. And all you have to do is talk to someone like myself that can walk you through the process of the numbers and what that looks like. So I just wanted to get that video out there today, because the reality is I do believe that that's the number one misnomer in our industry, is that you can't afford new equipment and you don't understand how people like me, when you walk into my stores, do have brand new modernized equipment. This goes for things like payment system, change machines, ATMs, the reality is, if you run your business properly, all of these things should pay for themselves. Your ROI should be very, very minimal, if not, a year or less in most cases. And so if you're not experiencing these things, and if I can help you in some way, reach out to me through my consulting website, laundromatmillionaire.com. If you have just a basic question, happy to reply to a quick email. I have no problem with that. I'm happy to help people. My email address is dave@laundromatmillionaire.com. And you can obviously find me on the forums and things like that. So if I can help in any way, please let me know. Hopefully this helps you all a little bit out there. Have a fantastic Tuesday, and we'll talk soon. Thanks. Bye.